There are four major points that this podcast was made to communicate. The first section communicates that the current system that we've established is fundamentally flawed, and that nearly every problem that humanity faces today is a byproduct of this flawed system. The second section is made to illustrate the only sustainable alternative to our current system, and what this alternative world would look like. The third section communicates the illusory beliefs that our current system reinforces, and the truth behind those illusory beliefs that would be made apparent if we made the transition to a sustainable lifestyle. The last section communicates how we can make the transition. To understand exactly where we went wrong, we first need to understand that an economy was invented as a solution to a problem, but it was a solution created without a thorough understanding of the true underlying problem that it was solving. If we had considered this more thoroughly, we would have recognized that an economy was not the most efficient solution to the problem. One of the most crucial elements to an effective problem-solving process is to first develop a thorough understanding of the problem before creating a solution. Unfortunately, this critical element is neglected in most problem-solving processes. Most people invest more energy into creating solutions for problems rather than into understanding the problem. To solve problems this way is to throw mud at a wall and hope that it sticks. It is ineffective. We've been creating solutions for problems that we don't really understand for as long as history has been documented. In the 19th century, doctors were prescribing heroin as a substitute for morphine, cocaine as a remedy for depression, headaches, and lethargy, and in the 1930s, cigarettes were prescribed for asthma, bronchitis, and the flu. We'd much rather acknowledge our ignorance in retrospect, but the truth is that we're still employing the same ignorant problem-solving processes for most of our problems today. We may as well be throwing darts at a dartboard. As people try to solve the major problems in the world, such as income inequality, the homeless population problem, climate change, unequal rights, and the world's political conflict, most energy here too is invested into creating solutions rather than in understanding where the true underlying problem lies. None of these problems existed before the invention of an economy, and that is not a correlation without cause. If you consider the true problem of income inequality, the problem underlying this problem is an imbalanced distribution of wealth. The problem underlying an imbalanced distribution of wealth is the economy itself. There is no such thing as an economy with an equal distribution of wealth, because of how a person's wealth compounds for or against them. In the hunter-gatherer era, wealth was distributed perfectly and equally. A person's wealth was directly determined by their expended energy. If you built one hut and killed one mammoth, you had no more or less material wealth than one hut and one mammoth. The way an economy is structured, your wealth is either compounding for you or against you. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer because of the role of momentum. This wealth gap only increases until it's so imbalanced that we experience an economic collapse, where it's given the opportunity to slightly rebalance itself, and this cycle repeats. Right now, the top 26 richest people in the world control more money than the bottom 50% of the global population, and the top 0.1% of the global population control more money than the bottom 90%. The last time we saw a wealth gap this large was right before the Great Depression. This wealth gap is an inherent part of the economy. Studies have shown that if all the wealth in the world was distributed perfectly and evenly, it would take about 5 years for it to go back into the same hands it was in before, simply because of the structure of an economy. The flawed structure of an economy is evident in far more ways than one. For example, any economist can tell you that greed is good for the economy. The more you spend, the more money is in circulation, the more jobs it creates, and the more overall growth within the economy. Any economist will also likely tell you that greed is the fundamental cause of nearly every economic collapse. When the fuel is the poison, not only does this imply that there's a problem within the economy, it implies that the problem is the economy. When you examine the other problems that we're currently faced with, such as the homeless population problem, similar to the problem of income inequality, the problem underlying homelessness is a problem of unequal opportunity. Just as there is no such economy with a balanced distribution of wealth, there is no such economy with perfectly equal opportunity for everyone. People have different advantages and disadvantages in our current system based on the social context they grew up in. More specifically, where they grew up, their family connections, and the financial position of their family. The closest we ever were to perfectly equal opportunity was during the hunter-gatherer era. Here too, the problem is the economy. There are very few existential problems we currently face in which the true birth of the problem cannot be traced back to the birth of the economy. One of the biggest threats that we face as a species is the threat of climate change. When you consider the problem underlying climate change, it's an increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The problem underlying this increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is our increased use of fossil fuels in our power plants, vehicles, and industrial facilities. The problem underlying this increased use of fossil fuels is corporate demand. Here too, the economy is the underlying problem. Most people wouldn't disagree with the statement that an economy is inherently flawed, but it brings the question, what is the alternative to an economy? Most alternatives to our current lifestyle that most people consider and debate are different forms of either capitalism or communism, but both of these are still branches of the economic system that is the problem in the first place. In other words, we're still solving these problems in the same way that doctors did by prescribing heroin, cocaine, and cigarettes to patients. If the medical field had a better understanding of the true underlying problem that they were creating solutions for, their methods would be much more effective and safer. The same is true if we had a better understanding of the world's problems that we're currently trying to solve. The solutions that we've been trying to create are not created with a deep enough understanding of the problem. Every political solution that's ever been invented was a surface-level solution, because if you truly understood the depth of the problem, you would realize that the true problem will always be traced back to the political system itself. It's impossible to create a perfect political system with perfect policies and perfect motives from politicians. Nature has governed itself for as long as it's existed, and as soon as people gain the power to act upon our fears, we established a political system out of the fear that the laws of nature are inadequate to keep balance among people. People are becoming more and more divided as they become more identified with their right-wing or left-wing views, without realizing that both of these ideologies are imperfect, because they're both based upon certain principles and policies within the inherently flawed economy. In the previous episode, the message that was communicated was that the most efficient use of someone's energy was to only trade with an individual or corporation as a means to an end until you were able to gain access to the tools, resources, and skill sets of whoever it is that you were trading with. If this truth was understood by the masses, an economy would have never been invented, because its flaw would have been recognized from its origin. People would have rather invested their time and energy into obtaining the tools and resources to create the lifestyle that they wanted, rather than trading with an individual or corporation that had the tools and resources that this person demanded. In other words, if you had access to the tools, resources, and the skill sets that were necessary to create the lifestyle that you're currently living, you wouldn't have to depend on the economy, and it would consequently become obsolete. This would happen if the factories that manufacture the products that you depend on were not in the hands of corporations, but were in the hands of our communities. These factories would be completely decentralized. If we transitioned to a world in which these factories existed within our communities, an economic system would be viewed through a similar lens that we now view the carriage, typewriter, and record player. It's simply a less efficient method to solving a problem. The problem that an economy solves for the individual is the problem of survival, as well as the problem of maintaining a convenient lifestyle. The economy is the method that we invented, but it's not the most efficient method. In this world where everyone had access to the same tools and resources, if you wanted to build a home, you would collect your own lumber and bring it to a factory to cut it yourself. You would do this because it would be a better use of your energy than to pay someone else or a corporation to do it for you. You would bring the necessary resources to the electronics factory and use the tools within it to create solar panels, batteries, and electrical wiring for your home. Many of these resources would be able to be extracted locally with the right tools. For the resources that aren't local, you could either travel to where the resources are domestic and gather them yourself, or if you had the available funds, you could pay to have these resources delivered to you. There are very few services that there would be demand for in this type of world, but distribution services would be one of them. As members of an economic system, the majority of our problems are solved by other people. Only a very small percentage of our problems do we truly solve independently. In a decentralized world, we would solve the majority of our problems independently, and only pay others to solve a small percentage of our problems for us. Shipping and distribution is an example of one service that would happen to fall within this small percentage of problems that we would not solve independently. This process of distribution would not be facilitated by any large corporation. It would be done on a much more personal and direct level. It would be facilitated by individuals that deliver the resources themselves in exchange for payment. There would be no middleman between this person and their customers. They would employ themselves, and people either would or wouldn't buy for them based on their online reputation. It's not that people wouldn't be capable of solving 100% of their problems independently in this world, aside from medical emergencies. It's just that for a small minority of our problems, it would happen to be more efficient to pay someone else to solve them for you. For some cheaper products, it would likely be a better investment of your energy to pay someone else to manufacture and deliver the products for you, rather than to invest the energy into gathering resources yourself and creating the product yourself. Restaurants are another type of business that would still survive in a decentralized world, not because people aren't capable of making their own food or wouldn't have the time, but because it's often worth it to pay someone for the convenience of their time in cooking. The biggest difference in this world is that nobody's livelihood and lifestyle would depend on income from their restaurant or any other business. All money in this world would simply be for the convenience of certain exchanges and for fun, because every person would already have a means of solving their problems independently. The idea of solving these problems independently might sound intimidating, such as building your own home, building your own vehicle, building your own appliances and electronic devices. The truth is that none of these processes are almost ever as complicated as you anticipate, and taking the time to learn how to solve these problems will always take less time than going to a job so that you can pay someone who already knows how to solve the problem. In the example of building a home, someone with knowledge in carpentry, electrical, and plumbing can build a tiny home in about 15 days by themselves if they're investing 8 hours a day. For someone who doesn't have any knowledge in carpentry, electrical work, or plumbing, it's estimated that it takes about 60 days. That's only an additional 45 days for the person to develop the necessary skill sets to build a home. If you're building a large home, you're applying the exact same principles on a larger scale. Websites would be developed with step-by-step instructions on how to build a home, how to build a vehicle, and how to build your appliances and other devices. To build a vehicle, you would simply follow the instructions on the website that show you how to use each tool within the factory and how to piece each part together. It would be the same as piecing together a puzzle, which doesn't take a great deal of intelligence to do. It only takes the ability to comprehend and follow instructions. It's like putting together a Lego set, but on a larger scale. In 2021, the average cost of a car reached a new high of $46,000. After taxes and interest, this ends up costing over $50,000, not including the cost of maintenance and gas. If you divide that cost by the median American's income, which is $16 an hour after taxes, it's 3,125 hours invested at a job to solve this problem, which comes out to be a year and a half of work at a full-time job. If a person had access to the factories where the car was manufactured, it would take significantly less than a year and a half to gather the resources and build the car yourself. By transitioning to this world, we would start to solve our problems with less and less energy. Our tools would become more effective with time, meaning it would take less energy from people to solve our problems. Recently, automated vertical farming technology has started to pave a new path for agriculture. These vertical farms use 20 times less space, 20 times less water, and are fully automated, other than the process of planting and harvesting the produce. Factories for producing agricultural technology like this would likely be some of the first factories built in the process of transitioning to this new world. One of the counter-arguments for this sort of lifestyle is that an economy is an effective system because it provides the opportunity for people to specialize in certain roles based on certain skill sets, and that specialization is necessary to maintain an effective system. In this world, people will still specialize in certain roles depending on their skill sets, but the truth is that it's not necessary. People who are naturally skilled as a mechanic might invest their energy into developing a more efficient vehicle, but everyone will have a basic understanding of mechanics. Just as nearly every American today knows how to operate a computer, but not every American is an IT technician. There are obviously certain skill sets that are necessary to learn in order to function in our modern society, such as the skill of driving a car, the skill of communication, and the skill of understanding and operating electronic devices. Everyone specializes in these certain skill sets to some degree, and in this world where people solved their problems independently, it would just mean that we would add a few more skills to our list of skill sets. Most people in their teenage years will have already developed all of the necessary skill sets to survive independently for the rest of their lives. Nearly everything that people do in this world will be done out of inspiration rather than obligation. The status of retired that people spend 40 plus years trying to attain in an economic system would be attained within a few short years, after your home is built, your car is built, and your automated farm is established. From that point forward, you would be able to do whatever you choose with your time. Although living in this world will be significantly more convenient than living in our current world, that's not the only reason that it's necessary to make the transition. It's necessary because by making the transition, we would also remove ourselves from the trajectory towards a mass extinction event. One of the biggest problems with the solutions that people create for the major problems that this world faces is that the solutions are often less efficient than our current way of operating or are simply ineffective. We've invented carbon capture plants to absorb the carbon dioxide that's being emitted into the atmosphere. But recently we've realized that many of these plants are emitting more carbon dioxide than they're absorbing. And even for the ones that aren't, there's almost no way we could build enough of these plants fast enough to create a noticeable change. Even if more and more people do become aware of climate change, and some people do decide to stop driving as much, more businesses start to become carbon neutral, and people begin to cut their consumption and waste, it's not going to be a dramatic enough change to reverse climate change. A radical change is necessary. It doesn't matter if our current way of operating as a society is unsustainable and is destroying the planet and any potential for a future for humans. We likely won't step off the trajectory towards a mass extinction event until we can create solutions that are more efficient than our current way of operating. In this alternative world, doing the thing that's more efficient also happens to be the thing that saves us from destroying this planet and our species. If we made the transition to this more efficient world by constructing these factories within our communities, the problem of income inequality, homelessness, climate change, our political conflict, and the threat of nuclear war would be inconsequential. Everyone would have access to the same tools, the same opportunity to gather the same resources, and have the opportunity to develop the necessary skill sets through utilizing the internet, which means in this world, everyone truly would have equal opportunity. If someone was homeless, they truly wouldn't have anyone to blame but themselves. Similar to the days of the hunter-gatherer, a person's wealth would be directly determined by their expended energy. In this world, there would be little to no demand for fossil fuels. It would make much more sense for a person to utilize solar, hydro, or wind power, rather than to extract oil themselves. Renewable energy sources would likely be the only energy sources in demand, because it would take much less energy to utilize them personally, rather than to utilize non-renewable energy sources. That also means that electric vehicles would be the only vehicles in demand. There would be zero waste in this world because every product would be created with the intention of sustainability and with no secondary motive of disposal. This means that climate change wouldn't be a threat. We would experience the benefit of having an incredibly convenient lifestyle and yet maintain the stability and equality that we experienced during the hunter-gatherer era. There would be no political conflict because there would be no political system. A person or organization only has power over you so long as you depend on them. In other words, anyone who tried to gain political power in this world would be treated as a joke. This also means there would be no threat of nuclear war. All of these would be consequences of transitioning to a decentralized world. Everything created in this world would be a work of art, and nothing would be made cheaply. Oftentimes, corporations will restrict and prevent more efficient solutions to problems, or higher quality products, because it's beneficial for corporate growth, and oftentimes necessary to maintain a competitive advantage. Our cars are designed to break down after so many miles. Our smartphones start to slow down when a new model is released, and the technology that exists today is far ahead of the technology that's available for the public to use, all because of corporate incentives. Some technology that is starting to come out, which is incredibly useful technology, is feared by the public because it's too efficient. One of the many fears of the contemporary worker is that eventually automation will take our jobs. If a more efficient solution threatens the stability of our current system, then maybe it's time to consider abandoning the system. There are many illusory beliefs that our current system perpetuates, which would be recognized as illusory if we did abandon the system, such as the illusion of ownership. Humans are the first animals to believe that because we have the capability to subjugate land, tools, and resources, that it gives us the right to. But we fail to recognize that it is illusory ownership. You don't really own it in the same way that you own your left arm. It's all just borrowed from the earth. It was all here before we were, and will be here after we leave. Even if we organize the earth's resources and materials to create buildings, vehicles, and appliances, it doesn't make them ours. We've been completely abusing our intelligence because we lack the wisdom to direct it. Another illusion that people will begin to recognize is the illusion of separateness. As members of an economy, we feel separate from one another because of how we're divided by our economic positions. We're divided by our nationality, our income class, our occupational work, and our political beliefs. In this new world, people will be significantly less divided, and would consequently feel much less disconnected from one another. People will start to realize that we're not as divided as we've been led to feel and believe. We would truly begin to see each other as equals. Our current system also reinforces the illusion that the purpose of life is to make it, to attain riches, to become famous, or to attain a powerful position, and up until you do, you're a tentative failure. Transitioning to a decentralized world would relieve people of a tremendous amount of pressure to find their place in this world, and to feel that up until you do, you're a lost soul with no purpose. People will realize that to simply exist is to have a place in this world. Some people will still become rich, and some people will still become famous, and people will find meaningful purposes, but it likely won't be from any pressure from society. It will be done out of inspiration rather than obligation. Life will be taken much less seriously, and people will start to realize that life really is a playful thing. Our system also reinforces the illusion that one person has genuine power over another. Politicians don't have real power, they have tools of manipulation. There truly is no such thing as a person with more power or status than another. We're all equal. Politicians have only been elected to a position that provided them the opportunity to manipulate people into doing what they believe is right or wrong. Even if a law or regulation makes sense and is logical, to say that it's not manipulation would be delusional. It's all just a way to pretend that we have more power or status than others. We're all equal, and in this world, it would be much easier to recognize that. These illusory beliefs that are constantly being reinforced by the system prevent people from being in touch with reality, because you're rather in touch with the illusions. Even someone who temporarily escapes society and goes into the mountains or somewhere away from people to heal from the sickness of the world eventually comes back into society to get sick again and sucked back into certain delusions. To make the transition to a decentralized world would be to begin the process of healing society collectively. To make this transition would mean initiating the construction of these factories within our communities. If people realized that it was in their best interest to do so, they could donate a very small portion of their income to a collective fund. The construction of certain factories would be prioritized, such as solar panel factories, factories for manufacturing batteries, and factories that produce agricultural technology such as automated vertical farms. If these decentralized factories were to be built, even if the economy were to collapse entirely, people would still have a means of powering the appliances within their home and would be capable of feeding themselves. With no central owner of these factories, if a tool were to break, communities would have to come together to fix it, which means that people would have to abandon their selfish attitudes and tendencies. It would certainly take a great deal of trust in one another. When it comes to developing and maintaining these factories and tools, we would really have to learn to think and work as a community rather than as individuals, because a factory is a tool for the collective, so it takes a collective effort to build and maintain. If we did establish these factories in every state in the United States, and people did begin to recognize that this way of living is more efficient, eventually these factories would start to become much more abundant, and people wouldn't have to travel so far to use them. Other factories would also be constructed in order to maintain the lifestyle that we currently have, such as factories for manufacturing electronic devices, factories for manufacturing furniture, and factories for manufacturing vehicles. Eventually, when people stop depending on the economy entirely, the construction of these factories would no longer happen by paying construction companies to build them, because there will be no construction company to hire. Eventually, we'll have to come together collectively to build them ourselves, which would be a better use of our energy anyway, rather than working for money and using that money to pay other people to build them. No one would be forced to help build the factories, but most people truly do have the moral structure that would make them feel incredibly uncomfortable with allowing others to voluntarily build something that they know that they're going to use. There will also be plenty of people who will choose not to utilize these factories and tools, just as there are people who make minimum wage that choose not to change their own oil. It doesn't make sense, but there's a certain level of illusory convenience that an economy provides that people get trapped by. It appears to be very convenient to be able to purchase a home simply by applying for a loan. When you consider that 8 hours of work every day for the next 17 years are going to be expended in order for you to continue living in the home, it feels much more heavy, which is why people don't consider it. The way that we've been operating as a society really doesn't make much sense when you consider the alternative. It doesn't make sense to continue paying someone else to change your oil when you're making minimum wage. It doesn't make sense to continue to take your clothes to a laundromat rather than to invest in a washer and dryer for your own home. It doesn't make sense to pay for Ubers indefinitely without saving up to buy your own vehicle. And it doesn't make sense to continue depending on an economy indefinitely without developing our own tools so that we can live an independent lifestyle. Putting the tools and resources that we depend on into our own hands is the only thing that makes sense.